Welcome to Between the Plates with me, Courtney, and Theo on the DMC Radio Network. And today we have Miss Sharyl on. Sharyl, how do you pronounce your last name so I do not pronounce it wrong?
Attkisson.
Attkisson, yes. So can you give our listeners a little bit of background about yourself?
I have worked in the news industry and local news as a producer, reporter, and anchor. And then at the network level for, 35-something plus years. I've worked at CNN, PBS, CBS, and now I have an independent show under Sinclair called Full Measure. It's a Sunday show that airs on NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox, Telemundo, and CW affiliates on Sundays across the nation.
That's awesome. That's wonderful. So how does it feel to be a woman in your industry?
I don't really think about it like that. I've never been one who sort of defines my job as a woman or versus a man. So I can't even say I really have contemplated that really in those terms.
Because I find myself supporting more women, like in every industry that is. And I was just curious. I'm so proud of you. Which journalists, are your heroes? Which journalists are your heroes?
You're very sweet. I don't think I grew up with heroes as journalists, and I didn't know much about the business. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know journalism was a profession. I was someone who have always thought a lot about truth and accuracy and fairness and making facts be known, and I've always loved to write. And when I went off to college, I think my second year, I heard other students talk about what they were changing their major to. And somebody said she was changing her major to journalism. I said, what is that? And once she described it, I thought, that's exactly what I would love to do. And happened to be, I was going to the University of Florida, which has one of the top journalism colleges in the country. So it was pretty much fate from that point on. But I can't say I grew up watching people or having heroes or even thinking about it.
So speaking of writing, your book Stonewalled was a New York Times bestseller. What inspired you to write The Smear?
I had seen a lot of narratives, as I like to say, and astroturf efforts really accelerating in the past 3, 4, 5, 6 years, where I think we in the news have allowed ourselves to be used as tools by these propagandists who hire and have PR firms, nonprofits, LLCs, all kinds of devices with which they use to influence us on social media through propaganda and fake accounts sometimes, influencing us through talking points and narratives on the news. And I started thinking, people would really appreciate knowing more about digging into this little-known, shadowy industry that pulls strings and really influences, or at least attempts to influence, pretty much every image and narrative we get on a daily basis.
Yeah, I concur. And speaking of that, you hear this term now, fake news, in our everyday life. Why are these hoaxes and deliberate misinformation part of today's mainstream media?
I think it's really blossomed from and gotten more sophisticated over decades. And I trace that in the book, The Smear, how, years ago, there's always been fake news. We didn't call it that. Maybe we called it supermarket tabloids. There have always been propaganda campaigns and narratives. During World War II, it was the precursor to the CIA that was using black, gray, and white propaganda to help us win the war. It was Hitler's propagandist named Goebbels that was coming up with all kinds of strategies and tactics for them to try to help win the hearts and minds of the people. And he recorded in his diary tactics like a lie told once remains a lie, but a lie told over and over again becomes the truth. And you can see these things applied in today's society. And I think I call them smear artists, but you might call them PR operators or whatever they call themselves, have learned how to use these tactics combined with social media and exploiting the news industry and infiltrating the news industry to create these artificial narratives that we see around us all the time.
Sure.
One of the most... go ahead, Theo.
I was just going to ask you what you thought about the CNN having to fire the 3 journalists who put out the fake news in the past week or so.
I don't know a lot about exactly why they were let go, because they simply said the story was retracted for not meeting standards, but they didn't say, is the story false? Did they make up sources allegedly? Did they not use enough sources? I mean, I don't know much about it, but I will say I've just been really surprised the last 2 years or so how many formerly reputable news organizations have made so many serious mistakes in fact, but mistakes in journalism that cause them to make those mistakes that amateurs aren't allowed to make, that journalism students aren't allowed to make, like not checking a source or using unreliable sources. Mm-hmm. And there has been, from what I can tell until now, very little repercussions for those at high levels making very, very serious and damaging mistakes over and over. So I guess it's good news if someone is taking seriously the idea that when the public trust is broken and when normal ethical behavior isn't followed, that something has to give. I guess that's a positive thing if that's what happened in this case. But I think it's a sad comment that, you know, the mistakes, like I say, that shouldn't even be made by a journalism student are being made and allowed at top news organizations in our country now.
Yeah. It's disappointing, you know. One of the most interesting stories that you have reported on in the Fast and the Furious gun walking story about how the ATF purposely allowed licensed firearms dealers to sell weapons to illegal straw buyers, hoping to track the guns to the Mexican drug cartel leaders and arrest them. Can you talk about that story a little bit?
Yes, I mean, what was fascinating about that story, I think a lot of journalists now are expected to know where a story is going to end up and who it's going to implicate before they're allowed to cover it, which is really not how news is often committed. I didn't know when I got a tip about this story and started pursuing it. I had no idea this would lead all the way to the Obama White House. I thought, if anything, that if it was true, it was just some sort of weird rogue operation happening in Phoenix, because who would imagine the federal government knew about this? But the fascinating thing about doing a story like this is following the facts as they're revealed where they lead, no matter how unpopular, no matter who they lead to. And I think it's a very invigorating and interesting experience. And this one, I just never expected it to go where it did. And I will tell you that in the beginning, Democrats were interested in pursuing the story. They thought that maybe that would help or appeal to some of their constituents. Republicans were somewhat interested, but they were all just sort of trying to figure out politically how that would impact them. They were trying to guess without knowing much about where the story would lead, whether it would hurt or help them. And I remember saying to a Democratic staffer on the Hill who was discussing the story with me after I had done my first piece, and he said, well, we've just got to figure out how this plays with our gun rights advocates, you know, and our constituents. And I said, does it matter? Isn't there sometimes just the right thing to do? And he said, you'd like to think so. Well, you know, as the story went on, Democrats decided not to embrace the story, not to take up the mantle of Fast and Furious. Republicans did, and from that point on, it was controversialized. There was a narrative and an AstroTurf effort pushed to make it look like some sort of partisan story that was somehow benefiting Republicans. And in fact, Democrats were thinking of embracing the story initially and then decided to reject it. The behind-the-scenes machinations of some of these stories are really fascinating.